Hello YouTube, SentinalhMC here. Welcome to episode 10 of my ReactorCraft Tutorial Series. In this episode, we're going to talk about getting ready for using breeder reactors. That's the next reactor we're talking about, and we need a different type of liquid to go into it. So this episode is going to be all about the electrolyzer and how to use it to produce molten sodium. That is the working fluid in a breeder reactor because it requires you to use sodium heaters. So first, to make the electrolyzer, you're going to need a reservoir, 4 liquid pipes, 2 base panels, and 2 steel ingots. Let's turn off any eye. 2 steel ingots. That gets you the electrolyzer. So it's not very expensive. It's really just a bunch of steel and a little bit of glass. And then to put into the electrolyzer, you're going to need salt. And you can make salt super easily with just a bucket of water and a crafting station. And that gives you salt. So you can auto-craft this so easily and get as much salt as you want. Anyway, the electrolyzer looks like this. Okay? Now, you need to use a lot of the sides of this thing to get it to work. You can see it's got 3 tanks, but we're only interested in 2 of them. This isn't the only thing you can do with the electrolyzer. And if you do that thing, then, which is extracting heavy water, putting in heavy water to get out deuterium and oxygen, then you use all 3 tanks. We're only going to use 2 tanks. But the whenever you use the electrolyzer, let's put it on the wall here, right there. You're going to get 2 outputs, 2 different fluids. One of them is lighter than the other, and that one's going to come out the top. Okay, so you need pipes on the top. The heavier one is going to come out the bottom, so you need a pipe on the bottom. Okay? You also need to put power into it, which is going to use another side. And you also need to heat it up, which is going to use a friction heater on another side. And you'll see that in a second. And then you're going to need to use a Van de Graaff generator on the other side. So make sure when you place this thing, there's a lot of room around it. Because as you can see, this is the setup here. We're using every single side except for one, the front face. And the funny thing is, you would actually use this front face as well if you were pumping water into it. But since we're just putting salt in it, we don't need that. But you would use every single face of this thing if you were actually pumping the water in, with a pipe. Which means you couldn't run this pipe this way, whatever. You can figure it out. So to use the electrolyzer, you need a couple of things. First thing you need to do is you need to give it power, and it requires different amount of. It requires 131,072 kilowatts in order to turn, in order to create molten sodium. Okay, if we go into the handbook, you can find this machine under the processing machines section. Electrolyzer. To electrolyze salt, you need 131,072 watts. It doesn't say how much you need to electrolyze water. I'm assuming it's less, but who knows? Might be more. Anyway, you put the power on any of the sides. That's why it was green on those sides. And then you need to heat it up. It takes a 801 degrees Celsius to melt the salt. Okay, so first you give it power, and then you also give it heat, which is why we're using the friction heater. We can't use a heater because we need to use pipe out the bottom, right? So we got a friction heater, and I just gave it the same amount of power as the electrolyzer with 128 newton meters of torque and 1024 radians per second, and it got it up to 846 C, which was perfectly fine. Just it's over the 801 to melt the sodium, the salt. But we're not done yet. We also need to use the Van de Graaff generator, because if you look in here, we're giving it enough power. Okay, we've heated it up. We put the stuff in there, but it's not doing anything. That's because the electrolyzer needs to have an electrical discharge, and you do that with a Van de Graaff generator. Now, you don't technically have to put the Van de Graaff generator right next to the electrolyzer, because when it discharges, it does arc. But unless you put it right next to it, you can't be certain that it's going to arc in the right direction. As well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe you do have to put it right next to it. All I know is that it works if you do. So now we have this white sparks jumping off, and if we look at here, we can see these 2 progress meters. All right, and these progress meters are moving. Every single time it gets a spark, it moves a little bit more. And we are producing 2 liquids. Well, one of them's a gas. We're producing chlorine gas. And we're also producing molten sodium. And this is the stuff that we have to put into the breeder reactor. So we're storing up molten sodium. That's the electrolyzer. We could probably speed this thing up by giving this Van de Graaff more power. Yeah. So make sure that the electrolyzer has more power, and then if you want to speed it up, just give the Van de Graaff some more juice. Ooh, now it's blue. And now we see the arrows are moving much faster now. And now it's purple. We see that the arrows are moving quite quickly now. I gotta make sure I don't blow this thing up. It's starting to scare me a little bit. I'm sure it's fine. I don't know. There's something about the Van de Graaff generator that scares me. But as we can see now, our electrolyzer is running very, very quickly. So as long as you can give a little stutter there, as long as you can give this Van de Graaff generator enough power to arc enough, you can run through and produce the sodium very quickly. Remember though that you're also producing the chlorine, so you gotta have somewhere to put that, and there is use for it, I'm sure. But there we go. We are producing molten sodium, and so these are going to go in some sodium boilers for the breeder reactor. So make sure you got quite a bit of it. That's going up real quick. Yeah, I was worried about blowing up the Van de Graaff generator, which I'm sure wouldn't happen because it has a place to discharge. But I don't know. There's something about all those electrical sparks that sort of scares me. If it wasn't inside my base, maybe I wouldn't be so cautious. But there you go. See, we're running through our salt here. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that even if there's no salt in there, the Van de Graaff will still discharge into the electrolyzer, which I think means that you're safe leaving this on. So you're not going to blow up the Van de Graaff generator. You're not going to get struck by lightning because it still has a place to discharge. Let's get some more salt. Just put some more salt in there so that we can see. It's going very good. So that's how you produce the molten sodium that you need for a breeder reactor. So so that's it. So that's the electrolyzer. Now in our next episode of the ReactorCraft series, we'll go through. We'll actually make a breeder reactor using the molten sodium. So stay tuned for that. I'm SentinalhMC, and I'm signing out.